Hello everyone, it's dietitian Andrea. In today's video, we are going to talk about how much fat you should be eating if trying to lose weight. And I know this amount might surprise some experience. Well, first of all, it makes sense that if you want to lose weight, the fat amount is going to be lower because at the end of the day, fat are calories. However, calories are not created equal. So each macronutrient will have a different effect. And hormones play a big role too. So this amount is going to be lower compared to a person that is trying to maintain their weight, and even lower compared to someone who is trying to gain weight. Not you guys. Hear me out. Please get this into your head. I've said it so many times. Do not do 0% fat or very low fat. Alright? I get very mad when patients tell me they're doing very low fat diets. I won't give them the good job sticker. I won't. Because they're not doing a good job. So I'm not gonna give them the sticker. We first need to understand why we need to eat enough fat. Yes, even when trying to lose weight. In fact, especially when trying to lose weight, because it goes beyond fat and calories and more towards your hormones and your body's biochemistry. There are many reasons why fat is so essential, such as fat-soluble vitamins absorption, maintenance of cell membrane structure, regulation of hormone production, nerve function, brain development, and so on. And interesting fact here, the human brain is almost 60% fat, and we'll talk about this on another video because this is super interesting. So, eating too little fat can give you vitamin deficiencies, depression, hormone imbalances, inflammation, and adversely affect levels of blood lipids such as LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. But today we are going to focus on how fat keeps your blood sugars and hormones stable to keep you satiated and full for longer, which helps you lose weight and maintain it for the long run, which is something most fat diets don't do. You won't keep that weight off for long. Soon after, you'll regain the weight, and you know that. Rather, we want to keep the weight off for long while keeping you healthy and full of energy and vitality while supporting your hormones. Since fat makes food taste better and fat helps you feel full sooner and full for longer, fat helps people better control their food choices. Alright, let's start with the first concept. Every time you eat, blood sugars spike. This is known as postprandial spike. Basically, temporary, high blood sugars in healthy amounts, so not extremely high, soon after eating. And let's pause for a second. Everything will be very easy to understand. I spent hours creating or compiling these designs and graphics to make it easy to understand. Anyways, let's go back to the chart. If we look at the chart and we compare how each macronutrient affects our blood sugars, we can see carbohydrates are the macronutrient that increase blood sugars the most, followed by protein and fat last. This is because carbohydrates and sugary foods are easily digestible. This means they get digested very easily, releasing their glucose units quickly, thus elevating blood sugars very fast and then falling soon after. This is because they don't stay steady for long, and thus you get the famous blood sugar crash. And sometimes they can drop lower than baseline. When blood glucose levels drop this low, this is known as hypoglycemia. Remember, hypo, low, hyper, high. This provokes a physiological stress response that leads to seek food to restore glucose levels and bring them up again. Remember we said simple carbohydrates and sugary foods spike blood sugars very fast, and then they drop very fast. So when you have low blood sugars, the cells in your body are not receiving enough energy. This causes telltale symptoms including hunger, irritability, fatigue, anxiety, headaches, difficulty concentrating, shakiness, and dizziness. A blood sugar crash leaves you hungry, even if it wasn't that long since you ate. Yep, a true nightmare. Fat cannot be what they call converted into glucose efficiently, and we'll go through this concept in a moment, which delays a blood sugar spike when paired with carbohydrates. Let's think about a food that is a carbohydrate but also has fat. Bread with peanut butter, for example. The fat from the peanut butter will delay the spike, and the brain will still be breaking down into glucose, but this process will take a bit longer than if it were to be consumed with no peanut butter or no fat or very low fat ingredients. So when carbohydrates are consumed alone, the spike is even higher. And remember, carbs spike blood glucose a lot already. So, carbohydrates directly and rapidly raise blood glucose. The more carbohydrates consumed, the higher the blood glucose levels will be, and more insulin will be required to manage the blood glucose elevation. Remember, insulin is the hormone that tells cells throughout your body to take in this glucose in your blood from your meal and get it inside your cells to use it for energy. If insulin is faulty, known as insulin resistance, insulin cannot properly get those glucose levels inside the cell, and thus blood sugar levels stay elevated. The body then tries to compensate and lower blood sugars that are not entering the cell by producing more insulin. The high levels of glucose are not only detrimental for your health, but also lead to abnormal high levels of insulin. Insulin is also the main fat storage hormone in the body. It tells fat cells to store fat. In fact, high insulin levels impair the body's ability to use fat for fuel, driving it instead into fat cells for storage. So basically, with high levels of insulin, you will not be able to lose weight. Protein indirectly raises blood glucose. However, protein per gram stimulates 60% less insulin per gram compared to carbohydrates. However, very high amounts of protein can raise insulin levels, so be careful overdoing protein. Unlike carbs or protein, fat cannot be broken down or converted into glucose, what they call efficiently. This simply means the process of converting fat to glucose is a little bit more complex. You can totally run your body on fat the same way you can convert glucose from amino acids. But we can go over this on another video because it involves a lot of chemistry and nomenclatures that need an entire video. So this conversion from fat to glucose is inconsequential on blood glucose levels. Therefore, dietary fat will cause no noticeable post-absorption elevation in blood glucose and insulin levels. Now that you understand how each macronutrient affects blood sugars and blood glucose, let me show you why you need fat and how blood glucose is affected using food graphs. This way, it will be super easy to understand. The first example shows how the fat content in milks keeps your blood sugar levels stable, while milks high in sugar and carbs and low in fat do the opposite. So from a purely glucose standpoint, sweetened almond, soy, and cow's milk all produce normal glucose responses, since they're higher in fat and protein and lower in sugars and carbohydrates. Oat milk, in the other hand, it's the milk that has the most carbohydrates in it, which explains the disproportionate glucose response. And we're talking about unsweetened oat milk. If oat milk has added sugars, then the spike is even higher. And please keep in mind that most brands add sugar to their milks to make them tastier. Now, why did I say whole milk and not skim milk? Let's look at this graph. The only difference between skim milk and full-fat milk is the fat content. When you remove the fat from full cream milk through food processing methods, you get skim milk. Lactose is the natural sugar found in milk. Now, the problem with a skim milk is that we are left with a product that has no fat anymore, which helped buffer the sugar from lactose. So essentially, skim milk is almost like an oat milk. Still not as high in carbs, but enough to raise blood sugar levels. You're getting 12 grams of naturally occurring sugar from lactose in just one glass of milk. And this is why on the graph we can see the skim milk has a higher glucose response than full-fat milk. If you can keep your blood sugar levels more steady without big jumps and drops, you'll feel less hungry, tired, grumpy, and with less cravings, especially at night. Next example. This one is also very important for you to know. When you eat fruit, the fructose, which is the sugar found in fruit, turns into glucose very fast. Fruit usually leads to a spiky glucose increase, despite it having some fiber. This is because fruit has more carbohydrates and sugar than fiber. In fact, if we compare the carb content in carrots and the fiber content to the carb and fiber in apples, we can see a massive difference. Of course, there are fruits that have more sugar than others, and we will go through those in another video. So a good way to reduce or buffer the glucose spike from a piece of fruit is to combine it with something that has fat. And even better if we can also add protein and additional fiber to it. If you're going to have fruit, I would pair it with nuts, for example. The protein, fiber, and fats in the nuts get digested more slowly and overall bring the glucose response of the entire thing down. But remember, fruit still has fructose, and that spike is still there, which can hinder your weight loss. So yes, if trying to lose weight, it's smart to choose fruits low in sugar and carbohydrates. Often people who are trying to lose weight think they are doing themselves a favor when they eat low-fat or 0% yogurt. Well, the first issue is companies often add sugar to low-fat yogurts to make them taste better. Because when you take the fat out of a product, it tastes bland, flavorless, boring. Then the second issue is we no longer have fat that buffers the blood sugar spike. So we have a double problem. Sugar makes our glucose spike. And because there is no fat in the yogurt, there is nothing to help reduce the spike. The reality is a full-fat yogurt will keep you full longer and not send glucose levels on a roller coaster that can finish in, ironically, weight gain and cravings, because you will eat soon after. And since you're craving, you will make poor food choices. And you can add berries to your full-fat yogurt. Berries are low in sugar compared to other fruits. For my coffee people, you need to know this. Any of the coffee drinks we order have a lot of sugar in them. As soon as something says vanilla, caramel, chocolate, you can be sure it will spike your blood glucose. It's much much better for your glucose levels to stick to espresso, filter, or Americano coffee with any kind of milk in them or cream than to go for sweetened concoctions. Always ask for unsweetened coffee. Sometimes coffee shops will add sugar without even asking. And funny thing, then they ask, do you want sugar with your coffee? And it's like, it has a lot of sugar already. What the hell are you asking? Now we're going to see how a breakfast high in protein and fat is a better choice than a high carbohydrate breakfast. In this case, we have a smoothie that is full of fructose, so sugar from fruit, and thus fully carb, with no fat at all. So it's a fully carb breakfast. And then eggs, which are protein and fat, and avocado that is fat. Not surprisingly, the smoothie spiked glucose levels very fast and did not stay stable for long. Whereas the omelette with avocado did not spike blood sugar levels at all and stayed steady for hours. And keep in mind your breakfast or your first meal, whenever that is, controls how hungry you feel for the rest of the day. It's very important to break the fast with a breakfast or whatever meal that is, high in fat and protein. And it has been proven that if our breakfast is spiky, it will make the rest of our day spikier too. A big spike of breakfast will start deregulating glucose levels. So our lunch and dinner will create bigger spikes, even if you're eating the same thing. And yes, for the same number of calories. So again, prioritize protein and fat instead of high sugar, high carb, no fat like a smoothie. And lastly, here is another great example of how fat keeps blood sugars stable and makes the spike more steady when consuming carbs. Here we can see how if we eat bread by itself, blood sugars spike very fast. But when we add fat like avocado, this spike is not as high. To help reduce the glucose roller coaster and feel full longer, balance carbs such as starches with protein, fiber, and fat. Yes, bread is a starch. So great candidates are avocados, cheese, olive oil, nut butters, and butter. But be careful because bread is still a carbohydrate. If you overdo carbs, you will not lose weight. The spike will still be there, just not as spiky. So yes, it's smart to decrease the carb amount if trying to lose weight. Okay, so let's talk numbers now. So how much fat should you eat per day? You must get at least 20 grams of fat per meal. I don't want you to go lower than that. 20 grams is the minimum. 20 grams is actually quite low. So from 20 to 35 grams of fat per meal. 20 grams for the very sedentary people who are not hungry, and 30 to 35 for people who are a bit more active. And if you're doing a low-carb, high-fat diet like the keto diet, and you're quite active and you're afraid of losing too much weight, you can do 40 grams of fat per meal. And you're gonna do 3 meals a day, no snacks. If you're constantly eating, snacking, you will be constantly raising your blood sugars and depending on food. If you're sedentary and not hungry, you can do 2, but I'd rather you do 3 smaller meals than 2 very big meals because that puts a lot of stress on the digestive system. You know, when you eat a very large volume of food in just one sitting. And that will also affect your blood sugars. You will get a big spike from that big volume of food, whether it's fat, protein, or carbs. Volume matters. And no, I don't want you to go lower than 1800 calories because that would be very low. Unless you're extremely sedentary and very petite, you might do 16 to 1700 calories. Please, no 1500 calories per day. That would be crazy. That would be extremely low. And that is going to metabolically destroy you. And if you're not very familiarized with fat amounts, let me show you this. You can take a screenshot and save it for later. It might be helpful. So for example, 1 tablespoon of heavy cream is 5 grams of fat and 51 calories. 1 egg is 5 grams of fat, 74 calories. 3 ounces or 85 grams of salmon are 11 grams of fat and 175 calories. As you can see, ground beef, if it's 80% fat and 20% lean, it's a little bit higher in fat and calories compared to salmon. 1 tablespoon of coconut oil or olive oil, 14 grams of fat and 120 calories. 3 ounces of brie cheese are 28 grams of fat. 1 tablespoon of almond butter, 10 grams of fat. 1 slice of bacon, 3 grams. About 10 macadamia nuts, 21 grams of fat. 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 8 grams of fat. 10 almonds, 6 grams of fat. 1 whole big avocado, 30 grams of fat. And lastly, 1 cup of ice cream, no added sugar, 22 grams of fat. And if you want to know more about other specific foods, you can always look them up. But hopefully now you have an idea of how much fat you should be eating and how much fat popular foods have. I hope that helped, and I'll see you on my next video. Do not do 0% fat or very low fat. Alright? That's bad. Don't do that, alright? Or I'm gonna get mad. Very mad.